Thank you very much, Greg. Appreciate that. Next up, Dara, who is the planner in the City of Brantford, and I will talk about the City of Brantford BIF-TIP program, which is not about restaurants or anything like that. It's the financial tax incentive program. And I'll run through things quickly. And if I make a mistake or leave something out, Tara's going to jump in and say, you goofed it up, Bowser. And at the end, Tara is going to go over the properties that you have in your handouts. There are some sheets, which are detail sheets on some city-owned properties which are coming up for development in the foreseeable future. And we'll point out that these are only the city properties. I mean, there are other private properties that we can't talk about because of information issues, but there are people who have private brownfield properties that they may wish to develop and which would also be available for these incentives.
Now this might be a silly question, but am I in anyone's way when they're seeing the slides? If I stood here, is this still okay? Okay.
Super. So the BIF-TIP exists under something called the Brownfield Sites Community Improvement Plan. There is an area which it applies to, which is, and there's a map available which says, okay, it has to be a brownfield inside this area. And the eligible costs, environmental costs 100%, environmental remediation works 100%, demolition related to remediation 100%, contaminant disposal 100%, fill and grading to replace soil 100%, and monitoring costs could be covered, and consulting fees could be covered. Now, in your handout package, there is a two-sided piece of paper, and it has, on the back side, it has eligible remedial costs with a lot more detail as to exactly what these costs are defined as and how much is covered. On the flip side of that piece of paper, now that we've all found it, and it was available, it was a supplemental, so it may have just been lying on top of your handout. Linda, I see you're looking for it. It's right on the table there under your arm. There you go. Right under the speaker bios. And the calculation is a fictitious property, and it's just a walkthrough of how this math could work for a particular property, and this is how you would go about it. And start off with Phase 1 and Phase 2 environmental reports. Now, you see right beside it says actual. That is because you have to have those done before you submit the application for the tax incentives. And you would submit the application when you have that done, but before you do remediation, so the rest of those are going to be estimates. Okay. So this property, fictitious property, $736,000 and change to remediate it. And to segue, non-eligible costs, and nothing to do with not remediation, no financing, no HSD, and only the ESA Phase 1 and Phase 2 can be recovered out of the costs that you would expend prior to submitting and having your application approved. Development charge reduction, up to 100% of the applicable development charges. The exception is the development charges don't include soft costs, consulting, planning, things like that. They only include hard remediation costs. And they are subtracted from the total amount you could have refunded through the BIF-TIP. So you take your total remediation costs. In this particular case, we're fictitiously saying there's 17 single-family units, total of $124,000 in development charges, and they would be deducted directly from those remediation costs. The BIF-TIP calculation is the incremental tax on the property. So if the taxes on the property are, for example, $100 a year, the new taxes after it's developed are projected to be $1,000 a year. That means the tax revenue from that property is going to go up to $900 a year. So that's the amount of the rebate annually that is available. So in this particular property, we're saying current taxes $3,200, future taxes estimated $51,698, less the current taxes. We have $48,498 per year in tax revenue, which would not otherwise occur unless the property is developed. That's an important point. And so that means the remaining remediation costs after the DCs are deducted is $612,000. If you divide that revenue in, then it could be, you could pay out the $612,000 in between 12 and 13 years after the property is developed. Okay? Timelines. Development charges are reduced at the time of payment. Rebates begin at the date of the first MPAC assessment, which is usually a 1 year after completion. And your maximum rebate repayment period is currently set at 20 years. Although, is that negotiable?
It might be negotiable.
Okay, right now it's 20 years, so don't get your hopes up. There is a provincial BIF tip that will rebate you the school portion of the property taxes, and your approved application through the Brantford BIF tip program will get you entry into the provincial program, and we don't have a lot of detail because the Ministry of Finance determines how exactly they're going to pay that and stuff like that. In your handouts, there is the BIF tip guidelines, which is a fairly thick package stapled together, and in the back of that, there is an application form. Okay. And the form and the guidelines give you much more detail than I'm going to give you on the application process. But basically, you get your ESAs and cost projections done. And through this process, certainly before you submit an application, you have a lot of conversations with city staff and planning staff to figure out what level of detail you need in your application. You submit your application is confidential when it's submitted. It's reviewed by the Brownfield Technical Committee, which is city staff, and it's also reviewed by the Brownfields Community Advisory Committee, which is a citizens group. Now I can point out, I'm here because I'm a member of the Brantfield Community Advisory Committee, and there are also members. Sarah is here, Linda Ford is here, and Chris Markle is here, and they're citizens who advise council on brownfields in the city of Brantford. The application is reviewed by this committee, and throughout those processes there may be back and forth, requests for additional information, and then you would be notified of the committee's joint decision. And then at that point, if you wish to go forward, there's a draft bylaw staff report, and it goes to Community Services Council, or as a committee, I don't know. And at that point, your application no longer becomes confidential. Okay, it becomes public. And then if it's approved, it goes on to be signed by the mayor and clerk. Provincial application to their BIF tip, and then the rebate begins after the rehabilitation is completed and the record of site condition is filed, and you get your MPAC first reassessment. As I said, that's the guideline that's in your handout. There's an application form in the back. One of the important pieces of the application form is this little portion, which is rezoning required? Can you talk about that, Tara?
For most of our properties that are identified in the pages to the left of your package, they are primarily industrial zoning currently. which means that they will need to be rezoned if you propose to change it to a more sensitive use like residential or parkland. So the zoning amendment application is really important to the BIF-TIP process, and presently the guidelines say that we are looking for that application process to occur after your BIF-TIP application is submitted, but I think in speaking to developers now, we're realizing that it's actually a process that should happen concurrently, and that most developers are offering to go through that planning application process first and then proceeding with the BIF-TIP application. So it's important that they get reassurance that their zoning will be approved by council before that they make a commitment to actually seek funding for that process. So it is really important that it happens concurrently and it's streamlined as the panelists had suggested.
Thanks, Tara. Bailed me out again, eh? The back of the application form, the last page, is really a key page on the application form, and this is all of the stuff that has to go along with the application. After you fill in your name and address and phone number and email, you need all of these attachments. And in this area, that certainly is an area where you want to be talking to city staff about the level of detail on each of these attachments. I have a question for Tara, and that is, I'm looking at these and I'm saying, geez, you know, if I was a developer, would I want all of these to be public? Like maybe my most recent financial statements, if I was a public company, maybe I wouldn't want those to be public. Is there a policy on that, or are we developing a policy on that, or is it a question that hasn't been answered?
Well, we're sensitive to the fact that as a private corporation that all your financials are private and shouldn't be made public to everyone. So we're willing, when it goes to council, and in the past we've done this, not every piece of information that we have listed here is in the council package for the public to see. But we do think it's important that staff are able to review, especially our finance department is able to review the financial statements to just be reassured that your corporation is in good standing and is financially capable of pursuing that development. So we're sensitive, and of course, as suggested by Greg and the mayor, the staff are very willing to be working with the development community to make you feel very comfortable as you go through this slightly onerous process. That while Dara is going through it rather quickly makes it seem so easy, it is a process and it does take time, but we are willing to work with you.
Yeah, maybe I should have sold cars. Maybe makes it look easy. Yeah, that's a heck of a lot of paperwork when you start working down that list and reading the fine print. There's a lot of paperwork.